Thank you all for being with us. My name is Tamuka Munaku. I am a Moyo from Mondoro, and I'm originally from Zimbabwe. Uh, I'm having the pleasure today to have a very important guest live here on Winnimtapa Restoration, as we want to address one of the subjects that has been going on through the ages that a lot of people have sort of misunderstood, and it is very pivotal around the Southern African region. And his name is Cecil John Rhodes. So we're here to talk about Cecil John Rhodes. And so a couple of years before, I was on Facebook and I was just going through a lot of feeds, and I came across an article that said, I think it was titled the South African Illuminati Frontman. And I looked, and it looked like it had very, very in-depth information about Cecil John Rhodes, because all that we know about this man is through history books and through things that have been publicized and approved to be in school curriculums. So I went through it, and then most of the stuff that was in there, you would not find it in school curriculum. So it really brought out a different side of this man. And the article was written by Melanie Vermeer. And so I started to research. I tried to get hold of, trying to contact this person with so much great knowledge. And for sure did. Ended up contacting her. And I'll tell you a little about her. She is born in South Africa, so she's a South African. So she's one of us from Africa. She is a alternative journalist. So she writes a lot of articles and books pertaining to, especially when it comes to conspiracy theory, when it comes to African spirituality, politics, and so many of the things that are not talked about, by media. So she has written extensively, and at the end of this interview, I'll also provide a lot of links if you would like to buy her books. If you're interested to knowing more about her website, everything will be available right there. So this is a woman who, because of speaking out, she became less, favorable because she was speaking the truth about Cecil John Rhodes and about the real conspiracy behind Southern Africa, which brought her to a point of almost having her life compromised, moving from South Africa to be in exile in Portugal. So she has been living in Portugal, and I think she's lived in London, in Holland, and a couple of other parts in Europe. But she essentially can't really go back home. So that's the kind of similarities that we have, that we are in a situation where we're kind of like in exile, just like many other Zimbabweans, because of the situations of the politics and the dynamics that are going on in Africa. Things are just not going well. So this is how we have in common. So I would like to welcome tonight, or to afternoon, whatever time it is over there for y'all. I would like to welcome Mel V. Welcome, Mel V.
Thank you, Tamika. That was a lovely introduction. It's such a privilege to be here with you. As I mentioned on one of my Facebook posts, I'm always grateful for the students of my work who are of African descent, because it's really for you guys that I've done all of this, to remind you of just how much of our African heritage has been lost to us, and just what an incredible place it is. And many of us who now live in exile, as I do, as many people have left Africa to seek a better life due to socio-economic reasons. I think it's important that we take pause to appreciate what and give reverence to what an amazing place Africa is, and it will never be forgotten. It's in us, that's where we come from, and very grateful for people from African descent and who've actually been born there and have had to go into exile, who take an interest in this work, because this is for you guys. This is so you can understand why we are in the place we are in, and how we got there. So.
Sure. And I'm really hoping that we can go through each and every aspect that needs to be dealt in thoroughly. Unfortunately, we don't have the platform to have people call in. People who have that have questions for you, simply because we're streaming through Zoom, and for some reason, Facebook is kind of sabotaging a lot of interaction, live video interaction. But that's understandable. If you do have any questions, feel free to just put a comment in there, and she will respond, and we'll continue to pull through. But first of all, we're going to be looking about the Southern African Guide to the Global Conspiracy. This is a book that she's written herself, extensively talking about Cecil John Rhodes, talking about the global conspiracy, about the Illuminati Frontman, who is the Illuminati, what it is, where it comes from, what is their agenda, and so many of these aspects that we're going to have to delve in and understand. Okay, so may you please introduce yourself, as well as a short biography, experiences, achievements, credentials, as well as future aspirations about yourself.
It's a lot in there. Okay. I born in South Africa, lived there for 23 years. I'm passionate about many things, and I've been an activist, I suppose, since I kind of woke up at the age of 33. I'd say that's probably when I sort of started looking into things. And I do want to say that I'm not very fond of the term conspiracy theorist. I prefer to call myself a corruption analyst. I think people get jaded with this title and no one takes them seriously. And really, as a journalist, I'm the kind of person that I won't discuss anything or present anything unless I can categorically prove what I'm talking about with enough references from credible sources, enough evidence. And that's where I suppose my skill has come in, is that I'm an investigative journalist with really a passion for truthful journalism. And that's been lost with mainstream media. I spent 10 years working in mainstream media in London, various capacities. I've done everything from working as a model to fashion styling to producing in front of, behind the camera, writing, and then got into independent media when I realized how dark. I mean, media is just, it's dark. It sucked my soul. I didn't even recognize myself half the time when I looked in the mirror when I was living in London. And moved to Holland kind of coincided with my whole what I call my escape from mainstream media and transition into indie media, where I started my own website and started interviewing people about things that were of interest to me, not just being a corporate media whore as I was when I lived in London. And I met a lot of very interesting people. I took an interest in conferences and spent a lot of time traveling around Europe to various conferences and met some amazing people. A lot of them, I don't know what it was. I think I was just super enthusiastic, but I was taken under the wing by some very interesting people like Bill Ryan and David Icke. And they really mentored me and told me what's what, and gave me a very good, what I call fundamental orientation, which meant that I had a good understanding of where to go, where not to go, when kind of looking for information, and the groundings of, when you're doing investigative work and research, you've got to follow the money. And I learned a lot from them, and made several documentary films. And I really have worked with just the greatest. One of my accolades I always say is I pride myself on the fact that I've worked with what I call the trifecta, or the four great people. I've interviewed them: David Icke, Dr. Credo Mutwa, Jacques Fresco, and of course, Jordan Maxwell. They've all been people that I've worked with, and I think I'm probably the only indie media journalist who's had the opportunity to get around to all these people because of how I've traveled and where I've been at certain times, which has enabled me these opportunities. And not only them, many other wonderful people who have contributed to my knowledge, my understanding of the greater context, but also of my position in the world and my purpose here at this time, which is really to experience, observe, take it all in, process, learn as much as I can, and then communicate in a way that people who are perhaps not as far along in their development as me can take it in a bite-sized chunks. And so with that, I've developed a vast plethora of, I suppose, self-development study. And one of them is specifically geared around the concept of language and symbolism. And that's my dragonology body of work. And I think that's where you and I really connected, Tamika, was really looking at sort of the words and the dragonology aspect, but also the whole understanding that when you're talking about mythology from one part of the world, it's so similar to other parts of the world, as you know, we find when we look at the mythology of places in Zimbabwe and Africa, and of course some of the legends told to us by Dr. Creda Mutwa. So there's you know, a great knowledge base from my side through all the research I've done, and then I've gotten the great opportunity to also work as in an advisory capacity to the Royal House of the Khoisan Nation, and I currently serve as the international media advisor to the Greater Aboriginal Community Council of South Africa. And with that, also have discovered the oldest and largest ancient advanced civilization to have yet been identified. It's my discovery, and that's in the Kalahari Desert, which of course is the Khoisan territory, which is why I work so closely with the Khoisan people, because I do obviously at some stage hope to return to Africa and document all of this stuff. So that's just a, you know, a bit of my background. Obviously there's so much more, but we'll start with that.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so what are some of the struggles and feedback that you have encountered after publishing your article, the South African, not article, but book, The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy?
Well, first off, I would like to say that my publisher had a really rough time after he published that book. He had to give up his job, and he actually, after he had printed it all out, I mean, he'd even delivered a printed copy to my mother's office for her birthday. So my mom's got a printed copy, but then he just suddenly decided he was not going to sell the printed copies anymore. He disappeared off the radar. His kids went to go stay with his parents in East London. And it was, you know, he just, for 3 months, we couldn't find him. And then when he resurfaced, he said that he had some difficulty. I mean, I've got the letter published on one of my websites. It had some difficulty and couldn't continue to be involved in publishing my works. And it's interesting because he's a guy who's come out and exposed Jehovah's Witnesses cults, which he was a part of. He's written a book called Cults. And yet I think his kids were cult stalked in school and all sorts because of the book. Now, when I went and obviously was reapplying for my passport and stuff, I was told, look, don't even think about going back to South Africa. If you say anything negative about Nelson Mandela, you're a target, especially as a white person. I mean, they'll just, you know, take you out or whatever. Because Nelson Mandela he's religion. He's an icon. He's a saint. You know, you can't tear down the saints. Yes. And, you know, the whole basis upon which South Africa is now is based on his legacy. And, you know, you don't want to be debunking that lie because, of course, Nelson Mandela is a papal puppet. He was 33rd degree Freemason. He absolutely beholden and sworn to the Vatican as their stooge. And, you know, it's common knowledge that, you know, Nelson Mandela never made any it's common knowledge to any journalist worthy of the title. Mandela never made any serious decisions without consulting the Oppenheimers, who are the Illuminati bloodline branch managers of South Africa. So when you understand all this and you know all this and you try to explain this to people, and I published the book, it made, you know, again, returning to South Africa, tough. It's not happening for me. So for my attempts to educate people and put this information out there, I have paid the ultimate price. So talk about, you know, what are some of the costs and oppositions I've had. This is where it's at. Now, I would also like to say that there have been some real efforts to discredit me. People, someone published my book as a listing on Amazon. Amazon's never sold my book. They put my book up as a listing on Amazon, and I don't know, got a whole bunch of people who probably never read my book to say nasty things about the book. So whenever you Google me and my book, you come up with the Amazon listing and all these really nasty comments. And, you know, the funny thing is some of the comments were made even before my book was published or sold, you know,
Wow.
which I thought was incredible. And Amazon will tell you themselves they've never ever had my book for sale. They've never sold it. It's never been in their stock. But try to get the book listing removed from Amazon. It's almost impossible. I've tried, and they just don't seem to be very helpful. No matter how many times we've called them, they just say they can't do it. And I don't understand why, because surely it's my intellectual property. I didn't give permission for that book to be listed there. You would think it'd be easy to get it removed, but not at all. And with the listing stays, of course, all the negative comments. So, and it was a pure trolling sort of exercise. So yeah, I mean, there are real efforts to discredit the work that I do. And I can see this is a coordinated attempt. There are obviously agency paid trolls who do this sort of thing for people like me. Anyway, I just think it gives more credibility to the work. They obviously are afraid of the truth.
Yeah, that's for sure. And in regards to Nelson Mandela, especially years after, when a lot of people have started to become more enlightened, and you know, especially in a lot of Pan-African groups and woke people, we now have come to that understanding that if you have an African leader that ends up becoming, you know, the hero of the world and very much, you know, receiving Nobel prizes and, you know, just being made of a significant symbol by the powers that be, then that's an automatic red flag.
Yes.
Because this guy, to be quite honest, and I've been to, you know, to South Africa, you know, years after he stepped out of office, the opportunity that he had to address the economic disparity, you know, the people that live in Soweto and all, you know, the tension between the white South Africans and the black South Africans, really nothing has changed. So when you look at it and you look, for example, what you said, and you look at his credentials and you look at all the Nobel Prizes and you look at every single thing that happened, this guy is a guy who's been locked in prison. You know, who knows if he was in prison or not, or, you know, whether he was just under, you know, in the underground. But then as soon as he comes out, he's this huge figure, huge hero. He's all for peace. You know, we just want, you know, peace and equality of everyone, and it's just that lovey-dovey guy. And really nothing happens after that. Nothing has been addressed. It's the same systems, it's the same institutions, and they're still there.
Lots of interesting points you touched on there. First off, let me just say, Nelson Mandela's not the lovey-dovey guy. He's a murderer. He killed people in churches. He organized bombings in churches and killed innocent people who went to pray. You know, so he went to jail because he was a terrorist. And in fact, you know, the thing America doesn't do is they don't ever admit that they were behind the jailing of Nelson Mandela, because at that time, this is in the 60s, America was very anti-communism, and Mandela was from the Communist Party. Don't forget, he was head of the Communist Party. That's where he came from. That's the origins. So Amnesty International also interceded on Mandela's behalf and wanted to get him taken out of jail. But in order to be taken out of, you know, as a political prisoner, you have to renounce the use of violence. And Nelson Mandela in jail would not renounce the use of violence. So this lovey-dovey facade he put on when he came out, it's absolute rubbish. His wife was having people necklaced, and that's when you put a rubber tie around someone's neck, fill it with petrol, and you set it on fire.
I've seen that with xenophobia, especially with well, a lot of our Zimbabwean brothers and sisters have also fell victim to that.
Yeah. Well, this is it. Nelson Mandela wasn't a particularly good guy. He was a terrorist. He was put in jail for being a murderer, for murdering lots of innocent people for his political ideals. The whole joke of apartheid, you know, it's quite controversial, because me as a white person talking about what apartheid was and what it wasn't, People go, oh, well, you know, you're a white apologist and all this. And I want to say it's categorically not true. The simple fact is that Nelson Mandela's brand of liberation didn't leave the country any better off. In fact, the country was worse off after his presidency than it was before. That's the reality. And the whole concept of apartheid, you know, if you are anti-apartheid, you're pro-black freedom. That was the aegis under which, you know, the whole thing was moved. But people didn't actually understand what apartheid was. And I'd like to take this moment to explain to people, because it's a very controversial subject. The concept of apartheid simply means the status of being apart, okay? Now, people have twisted that in the media to mean disrespectful racism, when actually it was more about the preservation of cultures. That was the initial idea behind apartheid by Dr. Verwoerd, who was the person who brought in the concept of separate development. Now, separate development was merely the establishment of what we call the Bantustans. Bantustan is basically the Bantu homelands. It was huge tract of traditional homelands which were given back to the black natives to become their own self-governing, their own self-run native homelands where they could teach their children in their traditional languages. They could have their own governments, their own parliaments, their own infrastructure, everything completely independent of the South African Republic. This is a fantastic thing, you know, self-governance, self-determination, all that, wonderful. It's, you know, cultural preservation, they get to speak their own language. And this is what the concept of apartheid was initially about. It was about separate development, about these Bantustans which were put aside for black people to have their own cultures. And that wasn't a very popular idea, because suddenly what it did was it took massive amounts of people out of the grips of the international bankers, because suddenly these independent states were surrounded by South Africa. And this is the reason why the Rothschild bankers organized for the assassination of Dr. Verwoerd. I mean, they tried once and they didn't get him. They shot him through his cheek and they got his ear, and then they did it again. So they really wanted him dead, you know, because of what he had done. He had actually done quite the opposite of what was being done in places like, for example, Australia, where they had didn't even recognize black people as people. They counted them in a national census as fauna and flora. That's how low. You were lower than animal. You were plant life if you were black. And what they genocided entire islands of native aboriginals. I mean, that was their policy. And in Canada, what they would do as a mercy, the church would go in and take the children from the tribes, inter them at these Indian residential schools, which are church run. 60% death rate because of the abuse these children went through at these Indian residential schools. And they were forced, the Indian was forced down them. They weren't allowed to speak their language. They had to pray to a new God, all of this kind of thing. That's what was not being done in South Africa. We were giving, in South Africa, these black people their own self-determining, self-governing homelands. And this was taken and spun in the media as something called apartheid, which was very, very bad because it was supposedly disrespectful to the black people. And all of a sudden, you know, they threw up all these minor little issues like, you know, the black people to go into the white areas have to have passbooks. Yeah, because if you're coming from the Bantustans, it's a different country. Tell me which border you cross today and you don't have a passport, okay? So this is one of the complaints, one of the grievances that supposedly made apartheid such a bad and disrespectful thing was that black people had to carry a passbook. But hell, we have passports today. Everyone has to carry one. In fact, we have more identification than ever before. But back then it was quite a new concept, making native people carry around a book of identity because they'd never had that before. So it became a bit of an issue of contention and was used as a reason to claim that we were, you know, saying that black people couldn't come into white areas and there was the separation. And yes, there was the separation. Okay, but here's the funny thing. People didn't understand the dynamics. Like, for example, you'd have the queues in the post office. A lot of black people weren't very literate. So the queue for the white people was much longer and it always goes out the post office door. The queue for the black people hardly ever had anybody in it. But yet the queue for the white people go out the door. And the white people complain that they couldn't go into the black people's queue either, or they would get fined. So apartheid worked both ways. It was restriction on both sort of races, the black and the white. And there was this definite thing going on. So, but it was only the negative stuff that was kind of spun. They kind of really
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. They maximize and capitalize on the negative stuff. It's just kind of like, the police situation here in the United States, how one black person gets killed and then bam, it's now a worldwide, protest.
yes.
Um, and then we,
What's that?
forgetting all these other things that are going on.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, moving on to the next question. Can you give us a synopsis about your findings regarding studying Cecil John Rhodes?
Cecil John Rhodes. Yeah. Now, I know there's a big movement at the moment, take Rhodes down and all of that. And to be honest with you, I think what needs to be clear is it's not just that he's a symbol of white men oppressing black people, because that in itself is not entirely true. As a statesman, Cecil John Rhodes was very closely connected to a number of important tribal black people whom he had very good relations with because he needed them. So he wasn't just, oh, I hate black people and I treat all black people badly, which is what they're making out like he is. He was a politician. He knew where the power lied. He was a very good statesman that way. But also, here's the thing. More than anything, he's a symbol of the shadow government, the hidden agenda. That is what he is. And that for that reason, I support the Rhodes Must Fall movement, not because of the whole, he was a white racist. Because ultimately Rhodes and the things he did, the money he left behind still funds the roundtable organizations. The people he was involved with, the Duke of Purbright, the Purbright Institute's involved with the coronavirus patents that are going around at the moment.
Wow. Wow.
And the Baron de Worms or the Duke of Purbright was, Rhodes's partner in South Africa. And both of these men were on the Queen's Privy Council, which is also another fact that isn't, they said they've edited out bits and pieces of Rhodes's history. You go onto the Oxford Oriel College research database about Rhodes. And of course, Rhodes is an Oxford scholar, and there's the Rhodes Institute at Oxford University. There's the Rhodes Scholarships, of which people like Bill Clinton were Rhodes Scholars. So very important people become Rhodes Scholars. And really, whilst he was at Oxford, Rhodes was indoctrinated into the idea of British imperialism through the Freemasons, which he became a member of whilst at Oxford. And it was there that kind of, even in his will, he left large amounts of money to the establishment of imperialism, total domination of the British Empire, of the whole world. And it's still very much the case, controlled by the Crown Corporation of various parts of everything. In fact, you start looking into, Serco, which is owned by the Queen. Serco is kind of responsible for a lot of vaccine companies and research institutions in the UK, which can be traced back to Cecil John Rhodes. And in the Anglo-Boer War, Cecil John Rhodes was funding vaccine testing and experimentation on the Boers who were prisoners of war in the concentration camps. So all of this kind of thing, you won't believe them. What's going on today traces all the way back to Cecil John Rhodes and the stuff he was getting up to. I can show you some of the patterns and things and how it all ties together. But he is absolutely a symbol of the Illuminati. He is an Illuminati frontman of note, not just for South Africa, but in terms of the people he was involved with. To this very day, the institutions set up by those people are controlling the agenda. The funding from Rhodes went into setting up a number of the roundtable organizations, Club of Rome and all that sort of thing, who go into this environmental lobby, the whole climate crisis nonsense. They're involved in pushing all of that. So yeah, it's interesting. Rhodes is just a deep and dark sort of a rabbit hole when you start climbing down it, even when you start getting into the antics of his personal life, because of course he was a homosexual as well.
And just before it's just an idea that just came to my mind before we move to the next question. What is your honest relationship between the Boers and the Rhodesians?
I don't, it's not something that I can answer categorically. I think Zimbabweans and South Africans have always had an affinity.
Okay.
And the borders and boundaries there aren't very clear, because I think South Africans and Zimbabweans, even here, when I have Zimbabwean friends who to me just remind me of home. So it's a similar flavor. Even though the white Zimbabweans are like the white South Africans, very much the same sort of, unique African heritage that comes
Yeah.
through us. They're slightly further to the north of us than we are. So.
Okay. Can you point out important elements about Cecil John Rhodes that you believe that many people do know or understand about him?
Well, I think it's important to know that he was a member of the Queen's Privy Council, which means this is the council that advises the Queen. And this is not part of common knowledge, but if you start looking into the archives, you can find newspaper clippings of him being mentioned in the newspaper as having been appointed to the Queen's Privy Council. I think it's important to understand that as well. He's been one of the people who were hugely responsible for the colonization of Africa, but not as an individual. He was absolutely backed by the Rothschild bankers, and he had important people who were sort of partnering with him at every step of the way in every aspect. It's also interesting to notice that he's a number of his awards and stuff are not mentioned on some of his biographies, because he actually resigned as the Prime Minister of Cape Town for his participation in what was called the Jamison Raid. It was the British's attempt, the British government, this is before the two Boer Wars, to annex the Boer provinces. The Jamison Raid, they marched a whole bunch of people down there, but the Boers commanders stopped them before they got to Pretoria. And Jamison was actually Rhodes's lover, Leander Starr Jamison. And in fact, when Rhodes died, Leander Starr Jamison lived in Rhodes's house by Rhodes's will agreement. In fact, when Cecil John Rhodes died, he died in Jamison's arms, and the guy wept like a baby. They were, probably close. They lived together for the last parts of their lives.
Who are the two other guys? Is it Pickering? And
yes, Pickering was a younger gentleman that Rhodes was into for a while, but then Pickering got married to a woman, and it absolutely broke Rhodes's heart. Pickering was his assistant or personal secretary that traveled with him everywhere. So.
How did Cecil Rhodes end up in South Africa from Britain? I understand he was born as an ordinary son of a reverend or something like that.
Yeah.
And how long did it take for him to become a conglomerate?
I think you'd have to look on Wikipedia to kind of see all the actual dates and times and how long it took. But
just a synopsis, yeah.
The way he got to South Africa was his brother was in South Africa, and he went over as a young kid because he was quite sickly as a child, had lung problems, and the weather was more agreeable compared to Britain. So he went over, and cotton farming didn't take off in Africa because that's what he initially went over to do. The climate doesn't suit it, and eventually he went into diamond mining, bought up a whole bunch of small claims, of course funded from somewhere. He did it on behalf of imperial interests, and he ended up amassing quite a fortune, and set up what was interesting, the British South African Company, which basically ran what is Rhodesia, and its charter company. Now, the charters were given by permission of the king or the queen or the ruling monarch of Britain, and these companies had basically the powers of governments. They had the powers to enforce, the powers to police, the powers to arrest, the power to bear arms and kill people that were a threat to the company. I mean, these guys were serious, and people were beholden, like slaves, contracted into these charter companies as well. So it's quite interesting. He set this charter company up called the British South African Company by royal charter, by permission of the Queen. So he's working on behest of Her Majesty. Okay, so a Victorian, I think it was Queen Victoria at the time.
Queen Victoria.
But he absolutely was a stooge of the crown, a big believer in imperial interest. He was always the pusher of imperialism, and he wanted Britain to rule the world, as was the modus operandi at the time, and is still the modus operandi, except it's done under different banners. Nowadays, we do it under the banner of Americanism, but America is also just a British, talk about the Pilgrims Agreement. British and America are in bed together, absolutely.
Have always been.
Always been, and they all beholden to the ultimate powers which sit at the Vatican in Rome. So,
what is Freemasonry and secret societies? So the reason I'm asking this is because we have a lot of Africans, and because what I'm for educating Africans, because they need to know about this, and most of the Africans that have become educated and have started to see the world through the lens of observation and experimentation, research. What if there's evidence? If there's not evidence, then it's controversial. And all this type of way of how we observe these things and how we're going to dive deep down into the behind scenes real government or real establishment or the elite. But it's going to be nice if we can have someone like yourself with all that experience that you have to kind of define and to point out the different elements, showing to us that this body breathes and is alive. Freemasonry, secret societies, the Bilderberg Group, the Round Table, the United States Foreign Affairs, the organization that deals, yes, and all these type of bodies, but essentially Freemasonry and secret societies.
Now, Freemasonry is interesting because I'd say it's just a very small percentage of Freemasons who are actually in the know, because there's 33 degrees of Freemasonry. It takes quite a long time to get through all of them. But after the 33rd degree, that's when you start from the white knowledge into the black knowledge. You flip, because of course, a symbol of Freemasonry is the tessellated tiles. It is black and white. That is the real nature of life. It's dualistic. And this is something that's been understood by the Gnostics and ancient Egyptian religions is always the dark and the light. The duality is constantly played out in the themes of the conflict between Set, the god of night, and Horus, the god of day. So it's all in there. But ultimately, the Freemasons started as an organization to preserve the knowledge of masonry, which is angles, geometry, and all that sort of thing, which was knowledge which was endowed to humanity by an advanced, intelligent race, sometimes known as the Anunnaki, the Archons, the angels, the reptilians, the dragons, whatever you want to call them. They imbued humanity with this knowledge on how to build temples, gave them the right angles, the orientation to the stars, and all that kind of thing. That came from a higher base of being that came and gave us that information. I mean, there's a reason why no other animal on the planet has these concepts. We were created specifically for the purpose of, this iteration of humanity is created for the specific purpose by an advanced race of mining gold. And we've got a large proportion of our brain, which doesn't really function. We only use something like 5 to 10% of our brain. Our DNA, what they say, 90% of it's considered junk DNA. It doesn't seem to do anything. And this is because we've been genetically modified. We've had parts of our body switched off. We've got amazing powers. If you look at things like Neanderthal man, they were about a third bigger. Their brain capacity was bigger. That's probably what was here when these advanced beings landed on our planet and started experimenting and genetically manipulating these guys into smaller beings to get into the mines and mine gold, because that is what they were after. And that's the Michael Tillinger body of work, Slave Species of Gold. And he goes along with that narrative, which is also what Zecharia Sitchin talks about in his books. And I'm a firm believer that this is absolutely true. You find source of this information in dozens of different places, and in so many different cultures. You know, if you read through culture mythologies, and I'll show you, I've got a very old dog-eared copy of Encyclopedia of Mythology, which is never far from my side because I spend my life looking at this stuff. And this one is, I think, from 1960s, okay? So before all this jaded educational dogma came in, this is just pure research from anthropologists. And, you know, when you kind of get into the understanding of how it all fits together, and that, you know, there's so many layers to it, to try and explain where the Freemasons fits in kind of seems a bit obtuse. But what they are a secret club. And you and me, we're not in that club. There is knowledge that they pass on through initiation rituals. And you've got to understand everything is very ritualistic. Everything is masked by multi-layered symbolism, and even when you get to the third degree, you don't understand what a lot of these symbols really are about. So only when you go from the into the dark side that you understand, okay, you're serving a serpentine dragon god, and that's what everything is about. You're preserving the knowledge given to you by these serpentine dragon gods in the form of symbolic allegories, and ultimately magical societies. And the Freemasons are just another version of a, you know, magical order, and they exist. You know, magic is real. You know, it's technology significantly advanced enough is indistinguishable from magic to a rural or native tribe. So you've got to understand that this information and technology and all of that was passed down through, not to everybody. You know, for a long time, the Dark Ages, it was forbidden for anyone who wasn't in the clergy or of the upper class to read and write. And that's how they've kept this knowledge in a very limited place. But, you know, with things like the internet over the last 20 years, being able to access more books online and information and research, people are beginning to understand this information, where it's come from, and that these secret societies have been there, keeping this information always through the ages, thousands of years old. Some of the stuff is, I mean, you look at something like the cross of the zodiac. It is one of the oldest allegorical symbols known to man. It goes back so far into prehistory, probably hundreds of thousands of years, as a symbolic symbol. And you can even see it carved into, because obviously the cross of the zodiac is the circle with a cross in the middle. The cross marks out the solstice and equinox lines, which obviously circle depicts the sun's movement through the course of the heavens over the 366 days of the year. But what's interesting to notice is that the cross of the zodiac shows up in ancient cave paintings. It shows up in African sculpture, ancient African rock art. It's always there. This conceptual image has always been known, and it was an image and symbols and writing with things, and the carving of artworks onto walls with things that were imbued to humanity by a higher, more advanced race. We were taught to read and write from an advanced race. So one of the first things they teach you is the conceptual image of, and that goes, you won't believe in Africa, I mean, the rock art in places like the Kalahari and in Zimbabwe, the great Zimbabwe ruins, you'll find those images and symbols carved there. You just got to have a little scratch around, and you know, Africa, I think was like the Lost Atlantis, actually.
Oh yeah, I highly agree on that. You know, even on the age of great Zimbabwe, I really don't think was constructed in the last 1,000 years. I really, I think it's very, very old.
Very old.
And just before I move on to the next question, you know, when I was listening to Credo Mutwa's interview with David Icke, when he started to mention, you know, things like the Chitauri, and you know, this guy is a Zulu. He's not like from Zimbabwe. And the moment he said Chitauri, that meant something to us, because Chitauri means, in our language, that the thing that talks, the creature that talks. That's what it means, Chitauri. So to speak in my language, in Shona, it means Taura. So Chitauri means the being that speaks. And I just became a little interested. I thought it was, I just gave it the benefit of the doubt, but I still had my skepticism. And he went on to talk about, how the Chitauri descended down. He essentially taught us how to speak, or deceived us how to speak, because he said we used to communicate telepathically, which makes perfect sense when you have a baby. Um, when a baby's born, a baby does not talk, but the baby has all these skills. A baby can communicate telepathically. They feel people's energies. They feel, if a bad person comes in the room, they see spiritual entities. They have this thing, and they lose that essential skill, God-given skill. They lose it when the moment they're taught how to speak. If you figured out the time that when they get to like 4 or 5 years or 3 years old, the moment they start speaking, then they just lose it.
Yeah.
And so, okay, I went on Google and I typed Chitauri, and boom, it's actually a Marvel character of extraterrestrials used in Hollywood for the cartoons and all these type of sci-fis. Shapeshifters. This is not just coincidence. Why would they take that name and plug it into a Marvel character? So we, in this world, and I like the way that you're saying that there's symbolisms. We need to start being able to decipher these symbolism and understand these things as we push forward. Than just being, thinking in just in a linear sort of way, in the way that we were taught in schools. Yeah. So I think it's very interesting where we're heading to, and I hope that people can start to pay more attention. Next question. Can you tell us a little about Rothschilds, their origins, Rockefellers, their origins, especially referring to the Rothschild and Rockefeller characters of the 1800s, and the rest of the Freemasons that Cecil John Rhodes was associated with?
Yeah, okay, so Cecil John Rhodes got a backing for his ventures in South Africa. The financing had to come from somewhere. So L.M. Rothschilds and Sons, that's Nathan and Mary Rothschilds, they were Jewish bankers who were based in London, and they financed everything. But also, you want to know about some of the other people that he was involved with. There was a guy called the Duke of Purbright, Baron de Worms, the first Duke of Purbright, who was actually the person who donated the land for what is now the Purbright Institute. And if you go and you actually check out things about the Purbright Institute, a little idea. But I will share with you a little bit about what I know. Okay, so basically, what you need to be looking at, and I do encourage people to go and check out this guy, Henry Rothschild. His name is Henry de Worms, the first Baron of Purbright. And he is actually related to the Rothschilds. And him and the Rothschilds underwrote Rhodes and the British South African companies, and of course De Beers in the Second World War, and of course were participating in the atrocities that went on in the concentration camps. Okay. Now, what's interesting to notice is that things today, what is known as the Wellcome Trust, was initially known as something called Burroughs Wellcome. And this was the company that was carrying out all of these experiments in the concentration camps. But if you actually have a look at, go on to some of the patents, there's patent number US 10103701B2 is actually a coronavirus patent, and the applicant is the Purbright Institute. And they are, it says at the bottom, it is basically the present invention provides a live attenuated coronavirus comprising of a variant replicase gene encoding protein comprising of mutation in one or more non-structural proteins. So it's scientific talk. The coronavirus may be used as a vaccine for treating and or preventing a disease such as infective bronchitis in a subject. This is a patent that they filed. So just to, in the climate of what's going on today, this is an institution, the Purbright Institute, that was, the land was donated to the Purbright Institute by this guy, the first Duke of Purbright, who was in fact the person who backed Cecil John Rhodes. So showing you how you want to know some of these people that he ties into and just how dark and pernicious they are. You want to start looking at the Rockefellers, who were hugely involved with funding the American Medical Association, which in fact what they did was they closed down all homeopathic treatments, pushed everything to pharmaceutical medication, and only funded universities that would go the pharmaceutical route. So big pharma, you know, is being taught through these university educational institutions, and to this day, I think doctors are just really glorified drug dealers. They don't get much education, maybe a half-hour lecture or a half-day lecture on nutrition when they go through their 7-year expensive educational process. And really what they are learning is, because they're funded by the drug companies, is to learn how to prescribe drugs and to be, you know, and understand what drugs do what, and to pick up on people's symptoms and prescribe to treat the symptoms, not actually become holistic practitioners and look at the root cause of illness and treat from there. So this is the whole thing that's tied in with people like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. It's the whole health mafia, the global health mafia, which are inextricably linked to many things that are playing out in our current socioeconomic climate post-COVID-19 world.
What is your, well, this is another thought that just came to me right now before we move to the next question. And probably I wrote it somewhere, we'll probably meet it again, but just what is your outlook for the COVID-19?
You know, I don't really want to say, I don't think it's positive. I think we're headed in a very dark direction. I wish I could be, you know, jumping and farting rainbows, but unfortunately, you know, we've known this is coming for a long time. Those of us who have been in the know, like me for the last 10 years, awake people, we've been saying this is coming down the line. Well, what we've been telling people is coming down the line is now here. The only thing for someone like me is I've had this burden of knowledge for 10 years and I'm still, you know, even with all of this information coming out, hitting up against a wall of ignorance, trying to get people to wake up and realize what this stuff is all about. Because of course now it's all of this was about vaccinations. You know, there's a problem reaction solution scenario where they created a problem, which is a supposed virus. They have a reaction to it, which is a shutdown, and you know, which of course cause global meltdown. And then the solution is the vaccine, which, by the way, they had a patent for before the outbreak started. So, you know, if you look at event 201, which was hosted last year as well, which was a scenario, simulation scenario, running plans for what would happen in the event of a global pandemic. All these things that's why we call it the plandemic. All these things have been planned to happen. It was planned to happen this way because vaccines, very profitable for big pharma and people like Bill Gates. So that's the situation that we're in right now, and it's not looking very good. I think the people have to rise up if we actually want to get rid of this corrupt shadow government that's just intent on poisoning us for profit.
I agree with you. Very true. Why was Rhodes interested particularly in what we now know today as Zimbabwe and less interested in South Africa? I know you just mentioned that he had some, say, prime minister, some kind of governmental role in South Africa at the time. Although he also began via BSAP and De Beers.
Yeah. He was the Prime Minister of the Cape, and he had to resign from the Cape. I'm not sure why he had kind of more interest and more influence in Zimbabwe, but they named the place after him, Rhodesia. You know, for a while it was called Rhodesia. But I think it was ultimately always about the minerals. You know, wherever he could find diamonds, he wanted to be in there. And, you know, that's really why I think he had such an interest in the area. Zimbabwe's got a lot of mineral-rich territory.
It does. We already talked about Rhodes' sexuality, fundamental reason why he chose to do that or whatever. Was Rhodes a racist?
That's an interesting question because, yeah, of course, you need to understand it's racism has been passed off as, you know, the whites are rich and suppress the blacks and they're poor. That's not necessarily true, because there were a lot of wealthy tribal leaders and stuff that Rhodes needed to negotiate with in order to get concessions for mining, etc. Rhodes was a skilled statesman, and he had a lot of black friends who were powerful. So if you were rich and you were powerful, he didn't care what color you were. So in that respect, no, he wasn't a racist. Did he probably say nasty things to his imperialist British friends while they were having whiskey and cigars about the color of his, you know, black associate's skin, you know, making nasty comments? Probably, because, you know, imperialist attitude is that black people were lower than white people. That came, unfortunately, from the British. So I wasn't there at the time. I couldn't tell you what was said and what wasn't, but definitely the way in which he indentured people to his companies, put them on contracts and all sorts of things, and the way he had separate the black and whites working separately and probably on different wages as well. So in that respect, yes, there wasn't equality. Yes, there probably was favoritism for the white workers. Yes, they probably earned more. But at the same time, he was a statesman. He knew how to negotiate. He was a diplomat, and he did have a lot of respect from some of the tribal leaders. In fact, there's a story about Rhodes running into the middle of the Matabele War, and after they shot the great sort of tribal witch doctor or spiritual leader, he kind of ran into the middle of all of it and begged them all to stop and negotiate with the leaders that were left of the Ndebele tribe, because they respected Rhodes. So there's lots of conflicting stories, but you got to imagine, like, being in his position in Africa at that time. I mean, it's a different landscape to the world that we have now. And in order to navigate your way around Africa, you would have to have some tribal leaders and things that you are consulting with, getting information from, you know, scouts and whatnot, who kind of understood the landscape, because of course you're scouting it for mineral opportunities, etc. So you would have to be working with the locals of the area. So there, again, was he a racist? Yeah, probably his attitude because of the British imperialism. But I think there's also a lot of misunderstanding as to where that line stops and where the crossover is.
Some are saying that Rhodes is justified for colonizing Southern Africa or Rhodesia, because back in the days, tribes were colonizing each other and every society was practicing this. How credible is this statement to you?
Well, this is the story. You know, Southern Africa, when the Boers left the Cape and moved into what was the Orange Free State and the Transvaal, what they called the Orange Free State and the Transvaal, there was nobody there. There were no black people there, because guess what? They had been all murdered by the Zulus, who would try to take over those territories at a certain point. And, you know, there was a lot. One of the things that's not documented, because of course the black people couldn't write back then, is the wars and between the black tribes that was happening in the 1700s and the 1800s. So yes, there's people colonize each other all the time. Another misnomer, of course, is, you know, that they say, you know, the white people are responsible for the black slave trade. And that's the Indian, I beg your pardon, Atlantic Ocean slave trade. You mustn't forget the Indian Ocean slave trade, which lots of white people were traded to the Arab nations, to the Holy Roman Empire, to the Ottoman Empire. White people were also sold as slaves, and that's the Indian Ocean slave trade, millions of them. So, you know, again, there's just different perceptions, I think, depending on what agendas are being played out, but and which iteration or portion of history you're isolating and looking at the cultural aspects. Because this is the thing, and I'm quite clear on this aspect from my research, is if you start going back maybe 3 or 4 cataclysms ago, you know, several iterations of humanity ago, it seems that there was absolutely a thriving, advanced, possibly black-skinned culture that ruled the world, because their statues turn up in things like South America, the Olmec heads. The Olmecs predate the Mayans and the Incas by many, many years. and those Olmec heads are distinctly African, okay, in their features. These might have been the people who at one stage were the rulers of the world. Then there was a cataclysm and they lost all their knowledge and technology and became hunters and gatherers and bushmen and whatever else. And then these colonizers come from Europe and come with a completely different culture and, kind of take over, fight wars with them. But this, you can't look at it in an isolated context of history, because there've been people who have colonized and captured each other going back through every iteration of the past. So to say, it's just, what you were saying, Cecil John Rhodes is justified for colonizing Africa. If it wasn't him, it would have been somebody else.
That's true. Yeah.
It's always happened. Divided, this whole desire to control the world is as old as, I think, is one of the oldest desires, and goes back with so many of these really psychotic leaders of the past, be it Xerxes of Persia, or be it the Caesars of Rome, or the Egyptian pharaohs. There hasn't been a major kingdom or empire where world domination wasn't part of the agenda.
Would you know how and why Rhodes ended up at Matopos and being buried there?
Yeah. It's sad that he's buried there, because that's the Matopos is very sacred to the native people of Zimbabwe, as you know. The Matopos is where all the tribal leaders, the heads of the various tribes were buried, the sacred shamans, the sangomas, and then he had himself buried even higher, at a higher point than all the tribal leaders and people. It was almost like so disrespectful to the culture. I mean, it's like walking into Native American a Native American burial site and just putting up bloody Nelson's column in the middle. It would be the equivalent of that. Nelson's column is what's in the middle of Trafalgar Square, which is in the central part of London. It was that much of a, this is my land and I'm going to be buried on your traditional sacred site. And the thing is that Rhodes being imbued with these secret societies, I think he had a knowledge of what it was he was serving. I do think at a certain level he did know, because the Mataba Mountains are very much linked with stories of the Chitauri, the dragons, the reptilian people. In fact, there's a guy there who calls the lizards. He actually can make a call. He kind of, to the tourists, he can speak to the little ground lizards that run around. They come to him. And when asked, how did you learn to do that? He goes, oh, that's the sound the Chitauri make. That's how I learned to call the lizards. And this is, it's on YouTube. You can look it up. So there is all this. There's something special about those mountains, and apparently if you strike the mountains at a certain point with an iron hammer, the whole thing vibrates because it's hollow inside. Of course, there's many stories that the dragons come from the inner earth, and many of the prophecies were given to prophets in caves and things like that, by angels stroke dragons stroke serpentine beings stroke gods or deities. So again, it just ties in with what we've already known. And when you start looking at other territories within Africa, the legends of the dragons just keep coming up again and again and again. It doesn't matter where you go, you just can't escape it.
Yeah, and that subject is later going to be expounded with you and Lionel Mashinga tomorrow, especially on mysteries and myths. I don't know if you're aware that they were settler soldiers who fought in the Ndebele British War. They died, and they were buried at Great Zimbabwe. Also, in what I think was a move that was strategic, not just disrespect, but knowledge of how to desecrate an area. And it's interesting that in 1902, when Cecil John Rhodes died, they exhumed the soldiers' remains and transported them to be buried right on top on Matopos. Are you aware about this?
Yeah, I have read about this, and again, I think it's putting a stamp. It's like, this is my land, and I'll be buried wherever I want. Screw you and your tribal territories. It was an ultimate sign of disrespect to the native people. Really, I mean, it was the final. Excuse my brazenness. It was the final sort of fuck you from the grave.
Right. Sure.
Really, it was.
Yeah.
So.
Have similar occurrences occurred in South Africa?
Such
Desecration.
All over. Actually, so much. And a lot of it not really known about, because and obviously when they desecrate these places, they don't really like to record it as desecration. You kind of just realize that something was here and it's no longer. And I'll give you some examples. You know, Rhodes desecrated the Zimbabwe monument, the Great Zimbabwe Ruins, for example. He went there and took stuff from it, which to this day is legendary. There was plaques with writing in other languages that nobody had ever seen, and apparently dug around the ruins as well and found artifacts that were rumored to be otherworldly, never seen before. So yeah, desecration at all levels. Desecration from things that Rhodes did. There's desecration from even people today. I think, you know, people wanting to tear statues of Rhodes down and things like that. And they, okay, yeah, all right, wasn't a great guy, but there's symbolically tearing things down. It's one thing, but it also, there's a very good strong case for vandalism. You know, that's what desecration is. It's real vandalism. So trying to change history, it's really what desecration comes down to. And that's what they're doing now with all these tearing down statues of, with all the madness that's going on. And
So, and I was talking to this with someone, and we, you know, in a civil sense, we kind of want to think about it as vandalism, and now we have to call city works, and they have to start working on the area, cleaning up the stuff. It's going to cost a lot of money. People are going to lose profits and all these kind of things. These are monumental, they're historical, but they are forgetting the symbolic significance of all these monuments. They have symbolic significance.
And some of it is prejudiced against certain races, no doubt. Okay, some of it will cause offense, absolutely. You know, there's for example, statues of Lord Kitchener, which are in London, and Lord Kitchener was the guy who was in charge of the concentration camps in the Boer War. I'm descended from the Boers. I look at the Kitchener statue and I go, that offends me. You know, I'd tear it down. I could. It's a magnificent statue, really. I'm not a vandalist, so I'm not going to go there. And this, you know, it's part of the history of Britain. The Anglo-Boer War was the most expensive war Britain's ever fought, and there were more British people in South Africa than there were South Africans. That's how desperately the Queen wanted to win the war, and how desperately Rhodes advised the Queen as part of a Privy Council, make sure you send a lot of soldiers there because you want their minerals, right? That's what they wanted, was the minerals. It was always about the wealth. They were pillagers and stealers. That's what they've done throughout history. They've done it to the native tribes of Africa. They've stolen all of the amazing technology that Black people had. I've seen some of it. It's kept in the Museum of Humankind, drawers of stuff that the Missionary Society of London confiscated from native African people, claiming that they are the devil's implements. And these are surgical tools that are way more advanced than anything you could see in Europe at that time. So, you know, they talk about Black people in Africa as been, you know, been clueless, you know, idiots, and we taught, you know, we the colonialists came and built their roads and gave them language and written. We underestimate the knowledge that was already there, and the knowledge that actually has been passed down through many generations from a previously advanced society that was wiped out in a cataclysm. You know, that's my work, The Greatest Discovery, if you get into all that. But yeah, there's greatness. There's such greatness in Africa. There have been such amazing tribal groups and kingdoms that have existed that have now disappeared completely. We don't have a single trace of it except for a few interesting archaeological discoveries. When you walk through, for example, I mean, there's just so many to go into. Perhaps I'll save that for tomorrow's interview. But yeah, there's there is a real sort of a misunderstanding of history because we look at it in isolated sections as opposed to understanding the greater overview.
That's true. And just for the last question before we go and take a break, just a short break, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. What do you think are the dynamics and the intent behind wherever the British Empire went and colonized? They went and they looked, they first, fought wars and there was bloodshed, and then they looked for ringleaders, spirit mediums of the native people. They had them, forced them to convert to Christianity. If they refused, then they were hanged. After being hanged, their heads were decapitated and packaged and taken to the United Kingdom so-called museums. That's where we want to believe they're taken. This was not only done to the Zimbabwean first war, in what we call first Chimurenga heroes. It was done to the Native Americans. It was done to the Aborigines. It was done to the Polynesians, the Polynesian islands, and many of these other indigenous and other African cultures prior to colonization. So we have our own perspective as Africans as why this happened, but it would be interesting to have your own. What are your thoughts, or what would be the reason behind that? Is it like trophy hunting, like like if you kill a lion, it's kind of like a sign of victory, or there's some other sinister reasons behind that?
Yeah, it's interesting. With everything that's going on at the moment, there's riots and people, breaking into department stores and pillaging the stores. And people are going, "Oh, the riots, the pillaging, crazy, crazy." I'm going, well, hang on. Haven't you seen the British Museum? What the bloody hell do you think it is? All pillaged, right?
Yeah.
All of it. It's taken from the tombs of the Egyptians, from the Africans. I mean, the Benin bronzes that came from Nigeria, from the old Benin country. I mean, those things are proof that there was once an advanced civilization living in Northern Africa when they thought that there were only hunters and gatherers. These Benin bronzes show art that is so much more advanced than even the classical Greeks of the same period, right? And the classical Greeks are putting all these marble carvings, and people just don't understand the importance when they see how beautifully some of the bronzes were done. Some of the older ones are better than the more recent ones because there wasn't a technology. It's almost like it's de-evolved. The older ones are so, the detail is phenomenal. It's just when you start getting into the pillaging, what's been done, what's been taken, and how things have been twisted, rearranged, repackaged, recycled. We think, we go to the British Museum, we look at all these lovely artifacts that we're getting culture, but really we're looking at the spoils of war and destruction. We're looking at things that people have taken from other people, probably under gunfire and duress. That's what we don't get when we walk into these lovely institutions that store all these things. So it's, again, it's, the dominant culture can get away with killing and murdering and war, but if you rise up and you go to jail, kind of thing.
Yeah.
The double standards of the establishment, and then again of the people.
All right, welcome back to Mtapa Restoration. My name is Stanley Munaku, or Tamuka Munaku, Stanley Tamuka Munaku. I am here today with Melanie Vermeer, aka Mel V. She is a South African alternative journalist. She's in exile living in Portugal and Europe. And our subject today is that we are essentially talking about the South African guide to the global conspiracy, South African Illuminati Frontman, and the reason why Southern Africa or Africa in general is in the state that we find ourselves in. And this is just a thought of mine that just came to me as I was logging on before we go through other questions that are to follow. Melanie, what is your honest opinion about why there seems to be a pattern of failure, like drastic failure in leadership, like gross failure? Uh, it's almost like it's just negligence, and it's deliberate. In Africa, there's so much hunger, there's so much unemployment, there's so much resources, and there's everything that we need in that continent to be an affluent continent, and to have uh, countries that are sustainable by their own selves. But we are not quite, we're continuing to be reliant on foreign aid. We have unemployment. We have African leaders. What what could your opinion be uh, as to why this is happening throughout the whole continent?
Well, I think you used the word, it is deliberate, it's by design. And, when you do, you notice there's this pattern in Africa, and I've written extensively about this, so these articles are available for people who are interested. When you start looking at some African countries, like, for example, I take at the extreme north, you've got, say, Libya, the fourth biggest country in Africa. I think, yeah. And then you got, down the bottom, you got Southern Africa. We had a time in Southern Africa during the presidency of Dr. Verwoerd, who was the prime minister. This is the one I spoke about earlier, who was assassinated. During his time, the economy did so well that we didn't need loans from the international bankers, hence why they killed him. So, the interest rates were so low for people, and he did so many great things. The economy was the best it had ever been, and that was not good for the people who control the world. They didn't want that, because that makes South Africa difficult to control and difficult to make them indebted to the World Bank, who would give them loans. What you want is always to be putting countries in debt to these international banking institutions, because that's how you keep them under control. Which is interesting, because you spoke about Mandela earlier. Mandela took over the debt from the apartheid government. He had a unique opportunity to say, this is a new government. I'm not beholden to the debt of the previous corrupt white government. We're starting from zero. No, he didn't. He took over their debt and carried on paying it back to the World Bank, because that's what they want. They wanted someone in place who would still continue to funnel the money out of the hands of the taxpayers into the people that control the world. Mandela was that puppet. So this is really what it is all about. You see the same thing happening in Libya. Libya was attacked, unfortunately, I think it was back in 2013 or whatever. And, that is a country that was absolutely thriving. Gaddafi was very good to his people. When I wrote an article about what Libya was like under Gaddafi, and although he was a flawed man, he wasn't perfect, and some of the things he did perhaps were a little extreme. He also was very good to his people. He did some amazing things, like didn't charge them for water. If you were buying a house, they would give you half the money for the house up front, and then you could take an interest-free mortgage from any bank for 20 years. It was interest-free. You paid off interest-free for 20 years. If you were studying, you got your studies paid for and pocket money, even if you studied abroad. I mean, Libya were very good to its people. And, he was doing things like getting the resources to Africa. Like, he had an unlimited water source from the river there, and he wanted to put pipelines to Africa. He wanted to bring in a gold-backed African currency called the dinar. And when you start messing with the money, you start to piss off the people who control the world. So, of course, what they did was they always made him out to be a bad guy, like he was responsible for Pan Am Flight 106, the Lockerbie bombing, supposedly, where the Pan Am flight came out of the air and landed over Lockerbie in Scotland. They blamed it on Gaddafi, which he wasn't responsible for. This is the Western media. And of course, they took him out. They shot him in front of the cameras, and it was all over CNN. I mean, they never, when did they ever show that kind of violence on a TV, like on a show like CNN, where they show the guy getting shot and dying and eking out slowly? They filmed the whole thing and showed it on mainstream media, because they wanted the world to know, look, we killed him, and we've got it on the proof of it that we did it. And then parade his body through the streets of Libya, which I think was very, very sad. The bottom line is that went in and took out Libya, which was probably one of the most thriving countries in Europe. And if you look, Libya has one of the most beautiful coastlines. It's got a massive stretch of coastline on the Mediterranean. Their economy, they could have been the next Dubai if they'd just not had the invasion. They had that much power, you know, that much land, that much resources. And of course, that's why America invaded Libya. And back to this story of, you know, why are there no good leaders? Is because there's a pattern, there's a design, and when you do too well and you don't follow the agenda, and if any leader comes up that wants to suddenly start doing something that's not what the shadow government and the dark agenda is all about, then they take you out. They did it to JF Kennedy. You know, might be doing it to, they've done it to a number of world leaders in the past, and there's a long list of assassinated leaders who have tried to escape this patterning and control of the cabal and this dark agenda. But ultimately, if you don't follow suit, they take you out one way or the other. So that's, yeah, you ask the questions, why is there no good leaders? And that's the reason why. It's by design. It's the way it is, because it's been made to be that way by some very evil forces.
Yeah, and I also can testify with my experience in Iraq. I was there from 2005 to 2008, and you know, coming from Africa and how we heard of the whole 9/11 and how we were just like boosted to, you know, go and stop terrorism and all that. Got there in Iraq, thought it was what they call a shithole. No, I got into Saddam's palace, the one that was the major palace in Baghdad, and it was also the first palace that was occupied by the U.S. coalition forces, and they dominated this place, and they just literally took over. The guy had chairs of gold and floors of marble. It was just glorious. I've never seen such infrastructure, even in the United States. It was just so magnificent. The roads, they had spaghetti roads in Iraq. So much infrastructure and so much great historical monuments. And then, you know, at the time I was still young, but later on I just started to dig in, and I really found that there were some other ulterior motives as to why U.S. entered and went to war with Iraq, including the Stargate that was seized. I think it's in one of the towns that are in Iraq, and all the monuments and all the artifacts. You know, we're talking about artifacts from Africa that were taken again to United States and to the United Kingdom. So it does look like there's some clearly some very sinister acts going on in the world to try and deter good leaders. And so going back to that, it's kind of like what I am seeing, because we do have testimonies that were done by, for example, John McManus, who used to be a U.S. envoy to Africa. It's on YouTube. I think he has a speech that he makes there, and he's trying to draft out and to articulate the New World Order agenda. And so he did it way back in the 80s, but it is making so much sense today. And essentially, and from what you're telling me, colonial governments, as bad as they were, you know, in regards to racism, in regards to just, you know, the way they would manage their countries, they seem to not be subservient to the powers that be, the elite. And it was the same situation that I could see with Ian Smith in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. The refusal to be subservient to the New World Order resulted in the financing for their removal. And so I'm hearing that with the prime minister that you were talking about in South Africa. It looks like he didn't go well. He didn't have a good relationship with the United Kingdom and the Queen. And so they did what they did, and they manipulated the situations. They made race be the bait, because so long as we have a black leader, you know, telling us what we want to hear and what is good to, in our eyes and how we want to believe. It doesn't matter how much the people are mistreated, the people suffer, and the powers that be get what they want at the end of the day.
Yes, that's the truth.
So it's a very concerning state of affairs in Africa in regards to Black people, in regards to settlers, and the white people that are there as well, with the history that we have, and with how we cannot move forward into the future as independent and self-sustaining people. It looks like we've been locked. I mean, talk about the current president of South Africa. We love him because he's Black, he's Ramaphosa, but just digging deep, we see all these ties that he had, and the alliances that he made with the powers that be. He has been in the game for a really long time.
Yeah.
So
that's why he's there, because he plays the game with the people who basically write the rules of the game.
Yeah, and which was something that was very different from pre-colonial African establishments, which were not subservient to the powers that be. We had our own system, and we believed in our ancestors. We were not answerable to the Queen of England. We were answerable to the forces that we believe in our own culture, which ended up being something that the settlers adopted because they wanted their independence as well. So it's going to have to take very much critical thinking, root cause analysis, in order to come up with a reliable contingency for Africa.
Yeah.
And if we're only going to have to appeal to emotions of race, emotions of what the people want to hear and what media wants to broadcast, it's not going to serve our interests.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
Moving on to the next question. What is the connection between the South African campus fraternities and Freemason initiatives with Matopos?
Okay, right. I don't know really how to link the Matopos into it, but I tell you the Freemasons and the campuses, you need to understand that when it comes to selecting the people who control the world, or there's a sort of an initiation that goes on. And normally, a good way of describing it is it's like a tapping ceremony. At Yale University is famous for this because, of course, they've got the Skull and Bones there, which is the secret society on campus. And a lot of American leaders have been through the secret society. It's well known that these secret societies are there to pluck out individuals that are of interest, either from good families or elite families or bloodlines or whatever, and groom them through these secret societies. And then there's two parts to the campus life. There becomes the part that becomes about the studying and the degree, and there's the other part that becomes about the fraternities. And you got these kind of things in America, these initiation ceremonies are called hazing. It's illegal in some states because hazing ceremonies can be quite severe. Students have been known to die, but it's really it gives you an idea of how there is an initiation process, there is a closed society, and to become part of the closed society takes a suffrage, a sacrifice, which is the whole initiation. That's why they call them neophytes. And you're a student of dragonology, you've got the Ophi, serpent, dragon, root word, and neophyte. A neophyte is a new initiate. And so, yes, when they're neophytes, the new initiates, they're getting into these cults, these serpentine, dragonitic cults, which start at university level. This is also where they start being parallel or tandem or alongside or feeding recruits and initiates to things like the Freemasons. And of course, back to Cecil John Rhodes, he's a good example of it, because it was when he did his degree at Oxford that he was invited into the Freemasons Lodge that is at Oxford University. So that's kind of how they work together, and then funnel these initiated people who get endowed with this high esoteric knowledge, which is one of the reasons why they get involved with this stuff, because of course the ego wants to have more knowledge than the average man and be more powerful, or whatever, or be in on the secret, or that is kept in these groups. So that's really one of the big drawing cards. It appeals to people with these ideas of delusions of grandeur and ego, which is generally what these is the prerequisite to end up in one of these circles. I think is a slight psychopathy and tendency for, I don't know, an ability to do unethical things.
Do you believe in any element of truth in the Bible, in Christianity, in Judaism, or any of the stories that are accounted for in the Apocryphas or in the Bible books?
I'm not a religious person, but I regularly quote the Bible because my book and my works, Dragonology, one of the tenets of Dragonology is that Dragonology is about serpent worship and the cult of the dragon. And this is the originating religion of theology, which is serpent worship, is the original root religion from which all other religions stem. Okay, and this is provable by the fact that, for example, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all considered to be Abrahamic religions. Why Abraham? Because Abraham was the first prophet, again, the Ophi root word in prophet. He was the first prophet, and recognized in all three religions as the first prophet of God, the one who brought the message. Now, angels, also known as messengers, are obviously conducting the will of a higher evolved, more intelligent species with technologies that they use to control us. And that's kind of why humanity is where we are on the path that we're on. But it's been done through things like religion, of course, get people mind controlled enough that they are willing to risk life and limb to build ridiculously sized temples, okay, to accommodate a faith. All right, then you've got them under control. So absolutely, yeah, it all comes from a common root. You see the patterns right the way through, all the same symbols and archetypes, and basic patterns are there. And it's very distinctive, like complete subservience to something, to the point of, again, building these insane sized pyramids, temples, complexes dedicated to the moon and the sun, aligned with the stars as the pyramids of Giza are, to get to the point where you are able to bring that amount of dedication, devotion to an ideology, a principle, a belief, a faith. I see the same hallmarks in every religion because it all comes from the same place.
Physical or spiritual entities. Science says we cannot be the only beings in this entire huge universe. We do seem to have very reoccurring visitations and appearances of entities that are supposed to be viewed as extraterrestrials from other planets. They just don't really change. There's no evidence that there's physical contact with them. They only appear and disappear in very, very unexplained ways. We have aliens, the UFOs that we talk about, the reptilians. We have the stories of the fallen angels, and which is another side of perspective. Fallen angels who came down on Earth, and after that they have been teaching a certain number of people how to govern and how to be sinister and how to keep things closed. What is your take on this and your understanding of, as we are going to later, Lionel is going to have to elaborate more on Dragonology and the myths and mysteries tomorrow, but just a small synopsis of what is your belief on this, the UFOs, Chitauri, reptilians, archons, whatever we want to call them, demons in a Christian sense, fallen angels and all that.
So where to start with that one? Well, I do absolutely believe that we have a presence that dominates and controls us. It's not of our species, it's more intelligent than us. It's a serpentine nature. The ancient Greeks called it drakon, which is where we get the word dragon. Drakon means great serpent. The serpent icon turns up in every religion, in almost every culture where you find temple building. You will find symbols of the serpent and people who are dedicated to worshipping serpentine beings. So yeah, I think that absolutely there's grounds for this. Now, it's interesting because people go, start talking about alien groups and visitations. And I want to say that I actually, in my information, I never ever get into the alien narrative because I'm not even talking about aliens. And yes, I've recently seen some funny things in the skies. I've seen UFOs myself. But I still won't get into the alien narrative because what I'm looking at is information that we can find here on Earth. Okay, there's recorded in clay tablets, that's recorded in ancient scrolls, that's recorded in ancient artworks. You can see this evidence clearly here. We don't even need to hypothesize or listen to contactees or abductees or all this kind of thing, because what we see documented, carved in stone on some ancient sites, is the recordings of, there have been other creatures here. There always have been throughout history. And who knows how many iterations of civilization have come and gone with different groups interacting with humanity over time. But even humanity as we are, as a species now, is a genetically modified organism. This isn't how we were probably found in a primal state by whoever came here and created us into our state that we are now. And yeah, I do think we were genetically created. The creation myth is in almost every single culture that you go past, that there was this we were created. We were genetically created in a laboratory probably to the species that we are now, which is why we've got so many genetic defects, but absolutely by an advanced, call them alien, extraterrestrial species that have messed with the natural evolutionary process of humanity, and they've imbued us with their sort of cult culture. That's why we call it culture, because we've been cultured, like you would culture bacteria in a petri dish. We have been cultured by these creatures to be able to read a certain language so that we can follow instructions, we can work the machines in the factories, we can be good little worker slaves, because you've got to have an operating template from which to work. You've got to, like a computer, you've got to have a basic code upon which to build all the other programs. You don't have an operational code, which is our language. You talk about the talkers. We didn't talk because we didn't have that before. It's one of the things they've given us, okay? It's one of the things that they have imbued us with is the language. Again, the word angu comes from the Latin word angui, which is serpent. The language they've given us and the talking is key to the sort of the tapestry that's interwoven into the fabric of our reality to keep us enslaved. So back to your question, yeah, absolutely. There is an advanced group that controls humanity. That's probably not human, most likely dragon or serpentine. I'm not sure if they're entirely in a physical plane of existence, because I think they also are able to move interdimensionally and to appear in physical form, as well as that's to manifest in front of you, as well as disappear, like vaporize. So the word vapor is cognizant with the word viper, another type of serpent, because they literally just disappear. And again,
shapeshift.
They shapeshift. The concept of the appearances of gods is again put across in the words like theophany, which is a Christian concept of the appearance or disappearance of a god. So all of these things are encoded into our language. The proof, the shape-shifting concept of them is encoded into our language. So many different examples that we cannot deny the existence of these creatures, because even just looking at the evidence within our language, they are there. They're in every aspect of our culture. I mean, I dare you to go to a Chinese restaurant and not find a dragon inside it somewhere on the menu or, whatever. The dragon iconography, the serpentine iconography, and the various iterations of their symbolism, the eagle, the dove, for example, various things, just even the serpent is everywhere throughout our culture. Their language, and the words we use, of course, is our life. We cannot live without our language in this world. So everything that we, in our entire world, even our pastimes, dancing, it comes from called ritualism. Meal times is a ritual, sitting down, eating meals, sporting activities, theatre, all of that started with dragon rituals. So they've basically given us our entire modern day culture. Even they say the musics came from the gods, you know, the muses and all of that, which is why they say Satan invented rock and roll, because it all comes from the same sort of the devil, the Pan who plays the flute, supposedly emblematic of the devil playing his lute, the temptation. It all ties into the serpentine dragon controlling element, which is somewhat negative for humanity. And we look at the World Health Organization, also has a serpent on it, all these controlling entities that are implementing the agenda with regards to COVID-19. You'll find the serpent emblem there. You know, they've left the clues for us, the breadcrumbs, if you're smart enough to see them for what they are, to understand how this reality is comprised and who the controlling powers truly are, which are alien, not human, certainly, far more intelligent than us. And we are, unfortunately, their slaves.
What is the advice that you can give Zimbabweans regarding Cecil John Rhodes being buried, him and his 36 counterparts, at Matopos, and our attempt to reverse the desecration of that sacred site?
Yeah. You know, just like they come and try to rewrite your history by putting their graves there and desecrating a site, it's kind of like, what do we do now? Do we come and reverse history that they wrote by then removing their graves? The dead are dead, is what I believe, and they should be left to lie. I think what Rhodes did was very wrong. I don't know how much difference it's going to make to the general suffering of the world by, say, moving his bones or reburying him elsewhere. I think there are people in South Africa and Zimbabwe now who are starving because of the COVID-19 situation. And really, I think people need to focus their efforts on saving lives and not worrying about those who are already past. We can't change the past. All we can do is, with our present moment, decide what tomorrow is going to be. And that's where people's focus needs to go.
Thank you. Would you say that it's true that every year some of the tourism income is coming from South African secret societies that pay tribute to Matopos and also perform rituals?
I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that. It's not anything I have information on, really, because again, as a journalist, I work from information.
Okay. Sure. All right. What is your understanding about African culture and spirituality?
You know, I saw in your Facebook you use the word Ubuntu, because that is it. I think that encompasses it for me. And people ask me, not just you, white people have asked me, you know, so you're European, you call yourself a white European, which European country do you identify with? And to be honest with you, I don't. I'm African, I'm a white African. And the way to describe it is that there is this spirituality that there's just something about, you know, you will never be able to take it out of me. I grew up there for 23 years of my life, and it's in me, it's in my blood, it's a feeling, it is that Ubuntu spirit. So I'm not one to get all hippie hoo-ha spiritual, but yes, when it comes to the African heritage, it's something you feel, it's something that connects you to other African people irrespective of color. It's a unity, it is a oneness. So that for me is what it is all about. It's something that within African tribes, they feel that same connectedness with their ancestors, with their tribal history, the oral stories that they pass down through their spiritual traditions. And that's something that you do become imbued with, irrespective of whether you're black and white, is that sense of connectedness with each other, the people of the past and the stories of the past. And that's something I carry with me always.
I think we talked a little bit about it before, but let's go more further with COVID-19, because we're currently under the lockdowns and all that, and it's not getting any better. Vaccinations, artificial intelligence, 5G. Can you elaborate more about these phenomena?
Well, to start again, all of this has been about, of course, an agenda to drive mandatory vaccinations. I, for one, don't particularly think that there is enough evidence to suggest that this virus is anything more than a regular flu season. Certainly the numbers don't suggest that. I don't think any more people die than would have died in a regular cold or flu season. And I think that the shutdown has been completely ridiculous, and that we should have, fought harder for our civil liberties, because just like that, it was all stripped from us very, very quickly. And, it's just insane what they've done to us. But this is what I'm sorry to say. I wish I could be more positive, but it's the beginning of the end. Okay, and whether they finish us or we finish them, something's got to give, right? And I'm not suggesting, because I don't get me wrong, I'd love nothing more than to arrive at Illuminati headquarters with my pitchforks and toss these guys out, whatever else. But it doesn't work like that. And I'm not one that advocates for rioting and destruction of public property and businesses. I think that's counterproductive to anything. I do, however, think it's time for those people who control the world and who profit off the suffering of the masses. I think it's time for them to get the hell out of the show, and that people need to start forming self-determining governments, smaller community-based councils for local community governance. Because I think actually we don't need government. We can do a better job. The internet exists now. We now can connect with people all over the world for advice and all sorts. People who lord it over us with their banks and their loans and their vaccines and their toxic, deliberate pollution output, and the rubbish food and the cancer-causing medicines and all of that, they need to go. The old system, it's crumbling. But with it, they're going to take down our entire infrastructure. And I honestly think, even on the ground here, where I am in southwestern corner of Europe, here in the Algarve in Portugal, you talk to the local Portuguese people here, they've had enough. They're saying things like, we're a few weeks or a few months away from proper freaking revolution. People just storming the buildings of parliament and government and all sorts. So I think we live in crazy times, really. The measures they're trying to implement onto us. I mean, South Africa, they banned the sale of alcohol and cigarettes, for goodness sakes, during lockdown. Imagine, I'm not a smoker, but imagine you're in lockdown and you're a smoker and you're not allowed to buy cigarettes. What's that all about, man? That's infringement of freedoms and human rights. Why do that to people? It's like you're locking them down already, but you're going to take away the few comforts that they still have. It's a torture of the human soul. They want to bring us to our knees, because when we are on our knees, we will accept anything they give us, right? Because we will think it's better than what we've got. This is about breaking our spirit. And that's the most important thing. But here's the great news. And I will end this on a slightly more positive, this rational positive note, is that you cannot underestimate the human spirit. We are remarkable beings. We are capable of so much. It's time for us to put aside all our differences and unite on our common ground and actually do something about what's, all of this, especially with so much access to the internet nowadays and everybody being online. I think this whole COVID-19 has been a great opportunity for the world to wake the hell up.
So we are all finally put in a corner, and vaccinations are now mandatory. Is Mel V going to get the vaccine?
Of course not. I'm a vaccine injury survivor. I'm completely deaf in my right ear as a result of vaccine injury as a kid. So I'm very sensitive. I have not taken pharmaceutical drugs in years. Everything. I make my own colloidal silver. I sell my own lunar silver. I'm very into naturopathic remedies, probiotics. I've got an artisan probiotic produce business here in the Algarve, so I'm very aware of how to keep myself healthy and how to self-medicate naturally. There's no way I'm submitting to a mandatory vaccination. I've been injured by it before. I'm super sensitive to toxins in my body. This is the reason why I don't smoke and I don't drink, hardly ever drink, is because my body really struggles with putting toxins in it. I keep my system pretty clean. My weakness, of course, is I love good food. I love baking. I grew up in a family that loves to barbecue, and my mom loved to bake cakes, and I still love that.
And build time.
Yeah, a good Africana girl. She knows how to cook. So I've grown up in that kind of food-loving culture, so I've got that in me. But I also am very lucky that I woke up when I did and met a lot of amazing people who showed me the way. And I will mention there's a lady called Desiree Rover, who's the first person I ever interviewed as an alternative media journalist, who is like the top anti-vaccine expert in Europe, and she told me what was what. And it was there and then that I kind of worked out, why I had gone deaf when I was a kid, because we kind of worked back. It was when I'd gotten the specific vaccination for polio at the age of 18 months that I had a cytokine storm in my body, which made me very mucousy, and I got an inner ear infection, and it ate away at my inner ears. So I'm completely deaf in my right ear, and I've only got hearing left in my left ear. It's caused me a lot of problems in life. So I am permanently disabled as a result of vaccines. So you ask me why I don't want to get the vaccine? Well, I've had some bad experiences,
Yeah.
So.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you understand or know about CERN and why it's there? In Switzerland, where they have what they call a God particle smashing the tiniest atoms, doesn't quite really resonate with a lot of people.
I mean, it's a great question. This CERN, it's really, they spent billions building this thing underground, Hadron Collider, which is a circular thing that goes for 20 kilometers underground, where what they do is they apparently smash particles together. All of that just to smash some particles together? Really? No, it doesn't make sense. Especially when you start looking at these rituals that they've performed on opening new tunnels in CERN. I mean, really satanic stuff. These rituals, I mean, just really weird, bizarre, occult bullshit. So when you look at some of the rituals, what I think is they're trying to open up a portal to another dimension. That's what that sort of technology would be used for. And of course, you said you were in Iraq. They seized a Stargate there. It's not beyond thinking that there is just some advanced technology. Got these deep underground military bases where they're working with technologies that are 1,000 years more advanced than anything we have in the public sector. So, yeah, why are they smashing these particles together? It's not about smashing particles, like a collider to smash particles together. There is so much more going on, because that's sort of the technology rips apart the very fabric of our existence, of the time-space continuum. So when doing that, where are we going to? Are we opening up dimensions, rifts, and shifting timelines? That starts to mess with some pretty interesting, reality fabric stuff. So
time traveling.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that could be going on. Other dimensional influences. Who knows? The gateway to hell, maybe. But it is a very interesting question. What the hell is CERN? And we need to keep asking and looking.
The Bohemian Grove. I know we've heard about stuff with Alex Jones and him gaining access to there and taking a small video about his encounter there.
It's interesting because that's of course the stuff of legends. That's kind of the access point for people into understanding what these people are really into. Because there's stories of these guys wander around the forest naked, and it's an all men gathering. I've heard stories of women being there too, but like they basically get naked and end rituals, and there's all sorts of interesting stuff that goes on that you wouldn't imagine people in Parliament would per se be involved in. I'm getting some feedback from you, Tamuka, if you just want to mute your mic. Oh,
Yeah.
no, it's on. There's all the sort of stuff that, you wouldn't understand that people in government and power would be involved with. But it's there. It's there. They're doing it. It's in the Redwood Forest, I think, in the northern parts of San Francisco. Even just the cremation of care ritual, which Alex Jones filmed. I mean, cremating care, what are you saying? You're burning your care away. Is that like getting rid of your conscience so that you can do bad stuff? You look at the language, it tells you everything about what these people are into and the agendas and practices and the reasons for the practices. And it's all, again, cult ritualism. Can't escape it. It's always there.
Where is the centralized point for the powers that be?
Good question. I don't think they've got one centralized point. I think they've had various central points in history from where they've operated. But if I was to actually really put, say, a major part of the central power would be, I've always reckoned, Vatican City, for so many reasons. It's everything about it, like only men can live in Vatican City kind of thing. Priests and page boys mostly. It's not exactly a savory place, but it's I think that's a large part of the power structure is, and where you could say we're a big part of the headquarters of it all, because I think the Vatican or the Jesuits, the Black Pope, controls so many organizations, military, intelligence apparatus, and then of course all the governments, that I'd say that would probably be the place that I'd pinpoint and go there. That's the place. If someone wants to drop the bomb, needs to go there, But first, before they do that, I want to get into the Vatican Archives, because they keep a lot of secrets in there. that's when it all comes down. That's the place I'm here. Everyone's having a fat party in the street. The Vatican Archives, they've got some of the biggest secrets, I think, that they just don't want people to know. But I would be very keen to get in there and see what they've got going on in there.
So I've heard about that. Who is the ultimate entity at the top of the hierarchy? Who is controlling the whole world? Is it a group of people? Is it a certain person, a certain persona? Who is behind all of this?
Who? It's what? What? First off, an agenda. The players, of course, being, as I've spoken about, the serpentine race, and they're the controllers, and we are the slaves. That's really what it is. And who the top one would be? I'm not familiar with the individual characters of the sort of dragon hierarchy, but it's definitely not a human at the very top.
True.
Yeah, there are various human frontmen who perhaps shapeshift or whatever else, who are in the positions of power. We know who they all are, various people who control everything, even behind the scenes. But I don't even think I think that there's still in between them and the ultimate powers, there's still several layers of black nobility, people who we've never even heard of. There's recent talk online about someone called Somerset Belanov, who is the third cousin to the Queen, and supposedly the ultimate head of the human hierarchy here on planet Earth. She's a woman. So, there's lots of theories about who it could be. But I myself haven't seen enough evidence to suggest one way or the other that it's any one particular person. I think it's a number of organizations which make up the power structure, which ultimately lead to the dragon control at the very top. And who knows how many of those guys there are. There's just no evidence to suggest one way or the other.
So we do know that there's spirit. We do know that there's different dimensions where there's entities that operate. What is your belief about when you die, if you have a soul, and there's so many, like in religions, reincarnation, heaven, hell. Do you believe in God? Do you believe in a positive spiritual sort of designation, and then another, negative spiritual designation?
Belief is an interesting thing. I don't have any religious outlook whatsoever. I understand that all religion are just cults. That's my personal outlook. I do, however, understand that we are a soul riding around in a human carriage, and I understand my spiritual designation enough to know, for example, that I don't believe my soul is of asexuality. I believe my sexuality is only the carriage that I ride around in. I don't think souls identify with sexuality per se. I think we are a soul riding around in either a male or a female body. Again, this throws up big questions with the whole controversial transgender movement, but I have an identification of my soul within me, and I can instinctually know that it's just a being. It's not identified with this label or that physical aspect or that attribute or that desire. I understand the spiritual nature of beingness in the present moment. I have that awareness within. So yes, spirituality is for me a very deeply personal thing. It's not a relationship with an external deity or a cult ideology. So there is that intense spiritual awareness within me. I deeply connect to nature. When I'm in nature, I feel the most at home. I regularly go down to the beach with my cats and spend time connecting with my natural environment, because that's me in my most natural and best state. So there is that, but also I think I'm lucky I'm not polluted and I'm completely divorced from any cult ideologies, thankfully, because of my dragonology studies and my works. It's given me that freedom that I do not put myself into any mental prison, such as a cult ideology or religion.
Do you have personal spiritual experiences that confirm or complement the reason why you are firm in your spiritual convictions?
So many. Too many to actually kind of explain it all. But through my journey of discovery, I've had the great opportunity of working with many interesting spiritual leaders and shamans, and I've done the ayahuasca ceremonies. So I've done the deep introspective spiritual journeys, which have really helped shape my outlook, because it's given me that knowledge of, yes, there is more beyond what we perceive in our five sense reality. And ultimately we are all just players in this game of life, and there are things that work beyond our control and existence. But also there's the other aspect of spirituality, which is energetics. If you live in a negative state energetically, you bring negative people to you, negative life experiences, and that's something I've had, yes, direct spiritual experience with as well. So I do believe what you put out, you attract to you.
What is your word for Christians and Muslims? I'm quite sure you do have relatives, family members who are Christian. When you see them going to church and holding Bible and probably praying, maybe one day you wake up not feeling well, they'll be like, "All right, Milani, I'm going to go ahead and lay a hand on you. I need to pray for you." How do you respond, and what is your opinion about it?
I don't actually know how I'd react if someone put their hand on me and wanted to pray for me. I really don't, because I really just want to sit them down and school them about what it is they really are doing, because what prayer is a contact with demonic entities. You're contracting with them. Okay. Now, when you are, please God help me, I'm losing my house, my child's got cancer, you are invoking entities from another dimension to contract with you. You've heard of the concept of the Faustian pact, doing the deal with the devil for fame. It's the same thing. It's like, how do you think these people contract with the devil? It's because they pray, or they will them into their realm, and they make these sort of Faustian pacts. So I don't do the prayer thing, because I don't want to get caught up in any karmic entanglements or deals with devils. I don't want people to pray for me because I don't want to get caught up in anybody else's karmic contracts or deals with devils. And, I do feel sorry for people who go to church and hold the Bible and all that, because as much as I do respect people's rights to any religion, man, if you want to slice open a chicken and dance in chicken blood in the moonlight, go ahead. I don't care. As long as, you leave the little children alone, it's fine. As long as it's about consenting adults and no one's getting too hurt, I'm okay. Do what the hell you like. I'm not here to tell anybody how to live their life. One of the things I believe most strongly in is freedom, whatever form freedom takes, so long as it's between consenting adults.
What are your views about the Jews currently in Israel and their affairs, their diplomacies, and their interaction with the international community? Just who they are generally and how they are coexisting with the Palestinians.
The Jews is a subject I don't really want to get into because I have grown up around Jewish people my whole life. I've got a lot of Jewish friends. However, I think when you start speaking about the Jews, you get yourself into hot water because you get branded as anti-Semitic.
True.
I would just say that there is an extraordinarily large percentage of Jewish people who control things like Hollywood and banks, and I don't think that's by design. I think there's absolutely some sort of clandestine link. Israel is an interesting place politically, and I'm not that much of an expert on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, except to say that we are seeing the same patterns all over the world. What you see, the apartheid and the conflict between races and clashes that's going on, it's really just, it's indicative of what we're seeing now. Whether you're clashing with someone because of race or because of a different belief system or a different lifestyle, really what you're doing is clashing with people based on differences. And this is a sad thing because ultimately, we as humanity, we all want the same things. We all want to be free. We all want to live in abundance. We all want to be loved. And that is the true beauty behind us as human beings. And yet, we still have the destructive tendency to focus on people's differences instead of focusing on our similarities. Why don't we unite on our common ground instead of fighting over our differences? So for me, and I look at the whole Palestinian-Israeli thing, and I just go, it's just symptomatic of the many destructive patterns that we have all over the world in various places.
What are your honest opinions? There's nothing good. If you, personally to me, if you are being objective and you're just speaking up your mind, you won't offend me. What are your thoughts about the Black Lives Matter and the current protests?
I know I won't offend you, and I know you appreciate my candor on this, but I will say to you that all lives matter. I think, going Black Lives Matter means you're saying that one group of lives matters more than another group of lives, or you're suggesting that perhaps the group of lives that is now mattering didn't matter as much before. Either way, it's a social manipulation. I think it's a psyops just to drive conflict between Black people and white people. And I think it's very sad to see people falling for this, actually. We really do need to be sharing the message that all lives matter, and irrespective of color, we are first and foremost people. And we need to respect each other's cultures while still preserving our own cultural heritage. But I think there needs to be also a shift in human consciousness. We need to become more forgiving, again, of each other's differences and each other's shortcomings and faux pas. I'm honest, I'm awfully imperfect, and I make mistakes all the time. Sometimes, I do things that I deeply regret. And we all do, okay? No one is without fault. So, why should we be picking on each other because of this or that or whatever? And it's the whole, I'm white, I wasn't welcomed in my home country of birth, being South Africa. As a foreigner, I'm not particularly welcome in the countries that I've moved to. When I moved to London, Holland, here, I'm still subjected to xenophobia, which is another form of racism. And this is what I've realized, it doesn't matter who you are, no matter where you go in the world, okay? We're all foreigners somewhere. Okay, people like to travel. We've all been a foreigner. You're a foreigner in the United States right now. I'm a foreigner in Portugal right now. Okay, this isn't the place where I was born. But this is the thing, is people have feet. And we have feet, not to stand still, but to move around. There's a whole industry built around this called the travel industry, right? Airlines and hotels, we move about. Okay, so we are going to be a foreigner at some point in our life, somewhere that we go to. So why are we hating on each other for being foreigners? It just seems ridiculous, you know? And yet here we are. This is the inane stupidity of humanity. And I say to people all the time, I'm not anti anything. I'm anti stupidity. I'm not anti-black. I'm not anti, this or anti-vaccines. I'm just anti stupidity, because it really, that's what it comes down to. You just can't believe the level of hypocrisy and stupidity that comes with some of this rhetoric that's coming out at the moment. And anyone with even the slightest capacity of critical thinking can see it for what it is.
Can you tell us a little bit about your concern about the white genocide in South Africa and how it has affected you and how it has affected your family?
Yeah, it's they don't want the white people there because the black people believe that the white people stole the land from them. I'm not going to get into whether or not that's true, because there's arguments, all sides to that. Mm-hmm. What I would say is that, yes, they don't want the white people there, and they're trying to get rid of the white people. They're killing the farmers, which is a problem, because the farmers create food for the nation. You get rid of all the farmers, you then get rid of all the food. So they are eventually going to end up killing everybody, because people are going to be starving. So the genocide is not just a white genocide. It's targeted at the white farmers, but it's also will eventually result in the genocide of the entire country when the food runs out. And you know what happened in Zimbabwe, okay?
Yeah.
When they got rid of the farmers, everybody starved. Yeah?
True.
So this is where we're headed now. And of course, COVID-19 hasn't helped, because there's now millions of people who without work, without employment, and people, they live hand to mouth day to day. They're just barely able to survive. Now, when you take the money away that they just barely had, then hunger, I mean, they're fighting hunger day by day. These people are just barely hanging on to life. And yeah, it's sad to see. It's a beautiful country with so much resource and so much capacity to do so much. In fact, South Africa has the capacity to feed the entire planet. There's a part of the Kalahari Desert, which used to be agricultural farmland about 70,000 years ago, which is about the size of the state of Arizona, but it was agricultural. You can see they've got these massive irrigation canals in between these agricultural plains that go on for hundreds of kilometers. And the amount of agriculture they were able to create in this space would have fed about 6 billion people. So just in this space, they were able to feed near enough what we have on planet Earth today. Okay.
Wow. Just a small synopsis about you. I could tell how you just wanted to tiptoe over it, because it's probably something special to you. But let's talk about that place in Botswana.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that place. This has become a bit of, when I was writing my book Spellbreaker, I was trying to explain the significance of the serpent, and that there is a serpent carving in the form of a rock that is in a cave in Botswana, in a place called Sedilo Hills. Now, I kind of just skipped over that, because all I was trying to prove is that this symbol of the serpent goes back to at least 70,000 years in the past. This has been research that was done by a lady called Professor Sheila Coulson, who is Associate Professor of Archaeology at Oslo University in Norway. And I've interviewed her, and I got all of her data. And I was fascinated by the site, because it is the oldest appearance of what seems to be ritual activity, as well as serpent symbol associated with ritual, which again proves that theology and serpent ritualism goes back a very long time. So when I started looking at the site and how interesting it was, and I started getting above it with Google Earth, and wow, when you start looking around the place, it's just like these perfectly straight lines that seem to go around Cedillo Hills. And when you actually start looking at what these perfectly straight lines are that go on for hundreds of kilometers, perfectly straight lines that surround these hills, they're actually agricultural plains that had canals separating them. So you've got agricultural plain for maybe a kilometer wide with 100-meter wide canals that separated them. And this plain is so vast and these lines are so straight that they could only have been done, I think, and created on the ground from a machine in the air. Okay, that's how straight these agricultural plains
Wow.
are, the canals with the lines. I mean, the technology it would have taken to create these things. I mean, I lived in Holland for 10 years, and Holland's full of canals. If you've ever been to Amsterdam, you'll know this. I've watched as they built canals and saw the infrastructure and what it took to build these canals. It's a lot of work and how much money it costs to build them. And even when you look at the canals in Holland, they're not even that straight. When the ones that are parallel to each other, none of them run as straight as what you're seeing as being built 70,000 years ago in what is now the Kalahari Desert, which I now think was once a lush agricultural plain, but there was a tsunami that came in from the Atlantic Ocean that swept into the Kalahari Desert, deposited huge amounts of salt. That's why you've got the Makati salt pans and the Etosha salt pans in that area. It's because that obviously was the salt water that dried up in the basins and then formed these salt pans. That's why they exist there. That was the result of a tsunami. And I think the Sahara Desert was formed in the same way because you find whale bones that aren't fossilized, which means they're only a few thousand years old, that are in the Sahara Desert because it was a tsunami from the Atlantic Ocean that took out most of that in the Western Africa. And the only part that was really saved was the part where you got Nigeria, Angola, Benin, and the Congo, which is now the Congo. And even, when you start looking at these advanced civilizations which exist in Africa, you go into the Congo Desert, I mean, the virgin forests of central Congo, there are palm nuts, okay, which date back to almost 2,000 years ago. And palm nuts are normally cultivated. They don't grow naturally. They grow quite weedy if they're natural, but there was an explorer who found palm nuts everywhere. It was where you get palm nut oil from. And he had them dated to about 2,000 years old. That means that this supposed virgin forest that's in the Congo wasn't virgin. It was agricultural land at one stage. That was 2,000 years ago. And that's now no longer, okay? But the landscape of Africa has changed so much and faced natural disasters, which people don't realize, and cultures have come and gone. And, we've got this just this incredible site that stretches over 3 countries in the Kalahari Desert, which, at some stage, that is my dream, is to raise the funding to go back and make a documentary and actually get this site protected, because it stretches over 3 countries. So getting UNESCO to protect this entire site is very difficult, especially in a place like Africa, where try to get that done in Africa, it's a nightmare. But it does. It goes over Zimbabwe. It goes over parts of Southern Africa. It goes over parts of Namibia. It goes over parts of Botswana. So it stretches over several African countries. And it's unique because smack in the middle of this massive landscape, which was an agricultural plain, which you can see from Google Earth, you can see from satellite images. You've got these Cedillo Hills, the mountains of the gods, they're called, with this cave, which has a serpent effigy in which they found, evidence of ritual dating back to 70,000 years ago. So it's an incredible site. I think it definitely deserves more exploration. I'd love to get in there when all this travel ban stuff abates and try and properly document all of this, because if you start, here's the other thing about this particular site, which is so damn interesting, is there is a Portuguese map which comes from 110 years before the Dutch East India Company lands at the Cape. So you're talking from 1540s that this map was constructed. And you see on this map, most accurately where Cedillo Hills is, you see on this old Portuguese map from 1540s, are these hills where Sedila Hills, you know, proportionately would be on the map next to the Okavango Panhandle, just before the Delta. And you also see 3 images of dragons surrounding these hills. This was on a Portuguese map. And it's incredible because, yeah, there is a serpent effigy in one of the caves. And then on this map from the Portuguese, and now bearing in mind, again, it's 110 years before Dutch East India Company landed the Cape and this territory is properly explored, which means these mountains, Sedila Hills, with this something to do with serpents and dragons, was known about by the Portuguese even before that part of Southern Africa was discovered. That is huge. Now, we'll show you the map one day when we talk by ourselves. It's an incredible find. But this, historically, there's legendarily something about, and it's written in Latin on the map. It says that a basilisk, which is another form of dragon, a basilisk lives under the mountain. So, you know, read into that how you want.
Yeah. Awesome stuff, which just marks the last portion, the last question. Then we will call it off. But this sort of question, I was hoping, and if he's not interested or he's not comfortable, that's fine, but I was hoping if Biggie can probably activate his video and sort of help you or put his own 2 cents into it.
No, he won't do that. He doesn't like doing that. Bless him. People always ask, though. They always ask, so no worries.
So what is the last message of hope that you can give the audience, considering racism, considering the powers that be that are trying to politically divide humans, our struggles, diseases, and all the economic hardship which is to follow?
Yeah, it's a good question to finish on. And there is only one word, it's the unity. We need to unite on our common ground. And our common ground is quite simply this: the pursuit of a free, fair, peaceful, sustainable, non-toxic world, where all of Earth's resources are the common heritage of all of Earth's inhabitants and not the exclusive intellectual property of a ruling elite to be lorded over us and for us to be enslaved. The debt slavery system has to stop. And we need to unite. That's the only way. Well, there's more of us than there are of them. I can tell you they're much more scared of us than we are of them yet.
Oh, yeah? Yeah,
that's and I know, the local, you're a police officer, the local police, even here in Portugal, they said, look, if troubles kick off at the supermarket and suddenly the poor start robbing the rich, the police won't get involved because they're afraid of a George Floyd incident. Yeah, they don't want that kind of duress. I feel sorry for people in positions of public servants at the moment. A lot of respect and empathy goes out to them because they're in a position where they've got to make tough decisions every moment of their life with a constantly evolving and changing socio-political landscape, and every day bringing a new challenge, a new tension, a new thing. Oh my God, we've got to be careful in case we offend this bloody group of people and kick off a bloody war. It's always a challenge. So what is the common message then that I want to send out to people? And that is, first off, if you want to keep the hope alive, you will have to unite on our common ground. Otherwise, the hope it's dead. There is nothing for us. And sooner people accept that we are at the end and we are in the down times, okay, the quicker they can move on to the next point. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do when it all comes crumbling down? I would say to people, be prepared, obviously. Do all the basic prepping stuff. There's I've got a list of things, but the most important thing is that we need to now start working together to bring an end to the corruption. And if possible, people need to get self-sustaining. They need to get off the grid. The more independent you are from the system, the better off you'll be long-term, because when the system crumbles, you're soon going to start seeing food shortages and things like that. So my message of hope is to people is empower yourselves to become self-sustaining, get off grid, and we need to come together and unite against a common enemy, not fight each other, be divided, because that's how they've conquered us for so long.
Thank you very much. That was Mel V. She is an alternative journalist. She does research all her life. She's been doing a lot of researches. She has written several books that I will provide the links after the end of this video. Feel free if you are interested. You could there's websites that I'm going to also provide for you to research more. And if there's anything that you need to ask, just put your comment there in the comment section. And if there's anything that you just want to inquire from me, feel free to reach out to me. That's Mel V. She's in Portugal. She's South African. She's African. She's one of us. A great lady, and always willing to, just willing to sincerely help people, inform people about what's going on. I do know that as you were listening, there was things that you were like, I'm not quite sure, but the bottom line is this is a sincere person who is objective, and she's saying things as it is. She's not a sugarcoater, and she has addressed so many of these aspects that need to be talked about. You know that having dialogue with for example, a Boer or a Rhodesian or one of the settler Africans of European descent is almost zero. This is an opportunity that we have had an honest opinion and dialogue with someone who is almost colorblind, because ever since I've talked to her, I think I've known you for about a year or something. I haven't seen zero bias or any sort of colorism in her. She sees a person as a human being. So on that note, I would like to thank you for just your humbleness and your coming down to our level to be able just to disseminate your information with us and to help us, as we are in a very critical moment globally, especially with the COVID-19 going on and all the hoaxes that are trying to pin down humanity into a more sophisticated matrix. So her message: we need to wake up, we need to unite, we need to stop to seeing each other as different different beings, because we're all one. So on that note, I would also like to thank Biggie for his assistance, helping us ever since we started. Thank you very much. I appreciate your presence here and your assisting us in making this very successful. Tomorrow, you'll be receiving another dose from Mel V, as she's going to be interviewed by Lionel Mashinge. And stay tuned, and I'll see you there. And as I close, and as you all know, I have my own ritual. Rituals are rituals. So to all of our ancestors who have passed on, and to all of our brothers and sisters who are still in the struggle, we pour libation for them. Ashe. Not yet Uhuru. I am, because we are Ubuntu. All right. Bye-bye.